Welcome to the Franchise Woman Podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forged. I'm Rebecca Monet, CEO and Chief Scientist at Zoracle Profiles, along with my co-host, community advocate, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, Tracy Kawa. So today, Tracy and I have an opportunity to talk with three unique women in three different business verticals, all who each took a very different path to become leaders. Today, our conversation is all about leadership, and who better to discuss it than Vanessa Yakobson? Is that how I pronounce it, Vanessa?
Almost Jakobsen, but that was close enough.
Yakobson. Oh my goodness. Thank you for correcting me. Vanessa battled and beat childhood cancer. Then she spent 11 years volunteering for the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario, where she learned how to build infrastructure and partnerships, skills she now uses as the CEO of Blo Blow Dry Bar. And then we have back with us today Kim Gubera, who's one of very few female CEOs in the global hydraulics industry. She has successfully led PIRTEK USA to the third fastest growing franchise based on unit percentage. Speed to decision, in Kim's mind, is vital to good leadership. And back with us today also is Robin Gagnon. She is the co-founder of We Sell Restaurants franchise, the nation's largest restaurant brokerage firm. And she is also the chair of the IFA's Women's Franchise Committee. And she thinks it's about time we rethink leadership. So welcome, ladies, and thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's start with a question to each of you. If you were to describe your leadership style, how would you describe it? And maybe, Kim, we start with you. How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I had this question come up actually a couple years ago, and we were talking earlier. I had to do some Googling to figure it out, but I came to the conclusion that I'm really a hybrid. So I'm going to say between transformational and servant leadership. Those are the two that I think most closely identify with my style. And a lot of that has to do with the situation that I'm currently in, which one of those I'm going to lean towards at any given time. So I probably, the other ones probably come into play, but those I would say are my predominant ones.
Do you think, Kim, that we switch leadership styles depending on the circumstance, and that's why you're more of a hybrid?
I believe so. I think it's just like personality traits. You probably have one that's your natural go-to, but when you're in these type of roles, you have to adapt a lot. You have to pivot a lot. And you have to sometimes even change your normal behaviors so that you can identify with what's going on and the people that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Robin, how about you? What would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I agree with Kim that it's very hard to nail one place in your life or one strategy in which you in which you adopt your leadership style. I think part of it comes back to who you are individually. And you mentioned the Women's Leadership Conference. We are actually talking about the evolution of leadership. I think I've evolved over time as a leader. I think early in my career, 20 years ago in Fortune 100 companies, the examples set for me were very non-democratic, somewhat authoritative. This is how you led because you were taking cues from the boys and you had to, that's how we led. And then as time went on and I aged and grew into my own self, I began to value so much the participation of others and the opinions and the ways in which they could help me get to a better place in my process. That I think that's really where I am today, much more participative in involving others in where we're going as a group and feeling very much like culture tied together to our promise takes us forward in our vision.
Which, Tracy, is your favorite topic of how culture and leadership style kind of merge, right?
Exactly. I was wondering actually, Robin, if you would consider yourself more of a coach or a mentor these days, like veering more towards that style of leadership.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, because one of my go-to interview questions is, tell me if you believe you're coachable, and then share an example with me of how you were coached through a situation. Because if someone is coachable, you can take them to whatever heights possible. But if they have all the answers, then you really can't bring them along on your team.
So true. So true.
Good point. Vanessa, how would you describe your leadership style as a CEO?
I don't know that I've got the lingo of the formal styles that that we've listed, but I would like to think it's very collaborative. It's important to me, like you were saying, to have that participatory style and dynamic, to make sure that other members of the team, whether it's the corporate team, our franchisees, feel very much that they can be a part of the conversation. I believe that good ideas come from everywhere, and I want people to feel very comfortable coming forward with ideas and expressing opinions. So I try to create a culture at our office that encourages that sort of collaboration among team members, and I strive as a leader to be the kind of leader that people feel comfortable coming to with maybe a dissenting opinion or another viewpoint.
I love that. One of the challenges I have seen in my life with the collaborative model or the democratic model is when our organization gets bigger and bigger, how do we keep that collaboration going and get that feedback and have people feel that they can participate and that they're significant and their voices can be heard? It gets harder and harder, at least from my experience, to do as we get bigger. And you're at how many units now, Vanessa? So
yeah, and I think that the other piece of that is, how do you create a culture as you grow where people feel that they can collaborate and have their voices heard, but not have the expectation that just because they want it a certain way or think things should be done a certain way, that that majority rules. Because in a franchise system, oftentimes as the franchisor, you've got a different perspective than the franchisees. You might understand why a group of franchisees believes one thing or wants things to be a certain way, but as the franchisor, you have a different system perspective and perhaps a longer term view. So to be able to create that culture and manage those expectations, that we want the input, we want the collaboration, but at the end of the day, as the leader or the leadership team, we're the ones making the final decision. So hearing and encouraging all those different viewpoints, but at the end of the day, being confident to take the decision.
it's kind of like we want to encourage collaboration, but collaboration does not equal consensus, right? Yeah. Too bad, right? Too bad we can't build consensus that way.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, because it's like, I think about my boys. Like, I don't always agree with them and they get annoyed sometimes. However, if I listen to them and I acknowledge them and I say, yes, and if we did it that way, XYZ would happen, so we're going to go this way instead. During those times, they're not angry at me. Right. And that's what it sounds like, kind of like the same thing that you're describing, Vanessa, where you're listening, you're hearing, and then you're making an executive decision, pretty much.
And like you said, acknowledging as well. One of my new franchisees just encouraged me to read the book Think Again by Adam Grant.
Love that book.
Great quote. I haven't finished it yet, so don't spoil it. There is a great quote that I actually shared in our corporate team Slack, which was something about, if you're having a disagreement with someone, how do you get it out of that personal emotional and get it into the more scientific reasonable? And the line was, can we debate this? because all of a sudden it's acknowledging that the other participant in the conversation might have a different perspective and point of view. And by saying, can we debate this? It shows respect for that and invites respect for one's own point of view, and then takes it hopefully out of that emotional realm. So it sounds like you're applying that sort of logic in your engagement with
you. Yeah, great book, great book. And that was a really great point that you made about it. Yeah. Wonderful.
So, ladies, speaking about that, you are not just leaders of your team at your individual companies, but you're also leaders as it relates to franchisees. And to Vanessa's point of collaboration and listening to our franchisees, do you feel your leadership style changes when communicating with and directing your franchisees rather than your corporate? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And maybe, Robin, we can go to you first on that thought.
I think to a certain extent, it does change. One, because that franchisee has made it an investment, right? And I tell my franchisees, they are CEOs of their own company. And thus they need to apply the same principles of leadership to their own business. So I sort of treat them on a different scale. And I feel like sometimes I can have a little bit of a tougher conversation with them, because they should know their numbers and they should understand what their responsibilities are. And they signed a very lengthy agreement, and we both agreed to do certain things. So we can have those conversations and sometimes agree to disagree and still end up in a great place where we're all very, very comfortable with one another. Not saying that I don't want their collaboration and their feedback, but I may push back harder with a franchisee, understanding that they're in a different place and a different mindset than I would on a corporate team member, especially someone, I'll say this, maybe shouldn't, but especially a young woman who's coming into herself, who I want to encourage her to challenge and to speak her voice and listen longer and give her more confidence in herself before I say, don't go down that path.
Interesting. So it is two different approaches. Kim, yours is also kind of interesting because a lot of your franchisees are men, right? A big percent. So
75%.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. So do the way you lead your franchisees, especially the men versus the women, and your employees, how is it different? How is it the same? What's kind of a common denominator that might always be there?
Yeah, I think because I kind of use the hybrid. So between the two, I think I'm the same. It was a great question, by the way, because honestly, I haven't thought of that. But do I change, when I'm dealing with one group as opposed to the other? But in thinking about it a little bit more, I think the reasoning behind that is maybe under in an organization where you weren't having high growth like we are, right? And growth can be, it's fabulous, but it can be painful, both for the franchisor and the franchisees. Mm-hmm. I think under a normal status quo, it might be more of the servant leadership type thing, because they are owners. It's about, honoring them, respecting them, serving them, really. But one thing that we've really had to work on, especially in the last 4 years as I've been CEO, is organizational collaboration towards a common vision and getting everybody in our franchise network. We had to kind of rebuild our culture over the last few years, right? And so it does have to be that transformational where you're focusing less on decision making, or in this case, mandating, right, to a franchise owner. Instead, you're giving them a strategic path and a direction and a vision to follow that then gets everybody on board moving in the right direction. So I think in my situation, it actually works perfectly because it just kind of aligns with what I naturally do. I don't know that it would always be that way, but in this growth mode, we're in a different time frame right now.
And that was actually what my next question was, and maybe Vanessa can deal with this too, because you guys have had some explosive growth. Is it different where you are in your stage of growth as an organization? But before we get to that question. I'm gonna put that one to Kim, and then I want to go to Vanessa and ask her more about if it's different one. But do you really think, Kim, that our leadership styles change based on where we are in our evolution as a franchise system?
I think it would have to. And I think if you look at longer term brands where you see a founder exit at some point, that's not always because they're ready to retire or they're tired or they've lost the vision or anything, but they have realized I need somebody else to take it to the next level. And so I think it's just a natural part of business when you're not in a flat organization.
I tend to agree. Vanessa, what are your thoughts on the difference between how you work with your team and how you work with franchisees? And has it changed as your organization keeps growing?
I think that for me, I think there are a lot of consistencies because my relationship with my franchisees, like my relationship with my corporate team, is very much driven by that value around collaboration and participation. But what I will say is that I think it does have to evolve as you grow. And that's one of the things that I'll admit I struggle with, because you do go from that place of serving, as you say, serving your franchisees and wanting to deliver that excellent service to set them up for success. And you, as a young system, go through a little bit of that, oh wow, they like us, they want to be here, and you feel like they're doing you a favor. And then you grow as a system and you need to uphold standards and maintain consistency, and you do have to become more authoritative. And so you do need to evolve as the system grows, just for the sake of efficiency, as we were saying earlier. As your system grows, how do you create those mechanisms for collaboration and participation in a very genuine way? We do need to and desire to hear from our franchisees and their teams, but how do you find that balance between that participatory style and that more, I'm going to say authoritative, which is not the word that I want to use, but where you can be firmer, where you can, like you're saying, Robin, say to a franchisee, you owe us to do everything you said you do when you signed the franchise agreement. How do you become a little bit more forceful and authoritative with that?
That sounds like a great question for Robin.
Yeah. In your court, Robin.
Okay, so evolution. So I think what's happened to me as a leader is, as our system has grown, I have definitively brought more leaders into the company, right? You've reached a point where you understand that you can only grow so far, and maybe that's a little bit about that change in landscape that Vanessa was referring to. But you have to know not only what you know, but what you don't know, and be willing to bring in resources to back you up. So we've brought two key people into our leadership team over the past year because we've been experiencing explosive growth, just because I can't be everywhere at one time. Neither can my husband, who's a co-founder, and we fill very different roles. But I think it's tough sometimes for founders to actually admit that, hey, I do need to shore up resources, and those resources need to be human resources, because we start out as knowing how to do this thing that we franchise that no one else really has a handle on. But if you keep doing that thing, you're never going to grow your brand. You're just going to do a thing. You're not going to be a franchise brand. So I think that as a franchisor, there's a lot of iterations of growth within your own path before you ultimately get to the place where, as Kim alluded, you may actually have to supplant yourself with someone else. But far before that time comes, if you just shore up your bench, you can still lead your company for a very long period of time.
I think that's such an important point, and I think that the best leaders are the ones who ultimately make themselves obsolete. And on the journey towards that, do surround themselves with the people who bring the skills and talents that they might lack. So I think that as a leader, recognizing where your gaps are in terms of what the company needs to grow and evolve is so key. And you can't have an ego about it. You have to recognize your own shortcomings or your own best place in the organization, fill the gaps around you, and ensure that if you step away, the team and the infrastructure are sufficient to enable things to keep moving forward.
This reminds me of a franchisor that I worked with for 19 years. And a woman leader was brought in a number of years back. She did a phenomenal job and brought in a gentleman that was being groomed to sort of step into a role, especially as they were going to go international. And the chairman and the board believed that she could take it national, but she didn't have the skills to go international. It wasn't really her within her skill set. So they were grooming this young man to kind of step into that role. And the egos and the pride started to come out. The better he did, the more frustrated she became. And ultimately, she fired him for some absolutely ridiculous reason. And I start to see that franchise organization falter and have some problems. Ego, what is this saying? The scriptures tell us pride cometh before the fall, right? And that's kind of what we saw. So, Vanessa, I think that's a beautiful point that you made, that as leaders, we need to nurture, as Robin said, this next wave of leaders, and our goal is to replace ourselves. Kim, tell me how you do that. How do you recognize talent and know to invest the time in them to groom them to a place where they can step into certain tough decisions and be leaders themselves, so you can work on other things, strategy, whatever it is? How do you recognize that, and what do you do to make that happen?
Well, I wish I could say I was great at it. It's a hard one, because what I've found is a lot of times people are either not willing or maybe not able to reach their full potential. And I find that super frustrating. So I'm one that tends to, I guess I look at core values more than talent necessarily. Things like loyalty, honesty, integrity, things that line up with our mission, our mission statement. Honestly, I mean, obviously you have to have professional skills, but I feel like sometimes that I can make it work with a person, and I can get them there, and I'm going to say I'm successful maybe 60% of the time. So I don't know if I'm maybe the right person to answer that. I wish I had. People tell me that I do have that I'll store a piece of information about someone and then plug them in, 2 years down the road. And I can do that, but I'm not always making the right decision. And I think too, just let me add, I think when you're having exponential growth, which it sounds like a lot of us on here are, it becomes that much harder, because you also have people hitting their Peter principle, and you don't know where that is going to happen. And they maybe can't keep up with the pace that we're going with. And that's something that we've struggled with in the last couple of years. So just to be honest, I wish I could give you more of a positive answer, but that's just really a truthful one of what we've come up against.
I really like what you said, because I think that really resonates with what we do at Zorko Profiles, because we're constantly training franchisors that you hire for compatibility and values and culture, because those are things that sometimes you can't necessarily train, right? For somebody to have the same values that your organization has. Because like Rebecca said, you can always train for the strengths.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, Kim, if you were playing baseball, 60%, that's pretty good batting average.
I'm a perfectionist at
I
heart, right?
know
So
you
I'm
are.
gonna,
I know
I'm
you
gonna say I
are.
want 100.
Funny. So let's shift topics a little bit. When you look at your past, was there an epiphany, so some sage that came into your life, some moment that really helped you become who you are today as a leader, an individual maybe, or a book, or an epiphany of sorts? Robin, how about you? Let's start with you.
So I have an unusual background because I had a number of small businesses just out of college and ran those for a dozen years, and then went back to school and got my MBA. Then I went into corporate America, did Fortune 100 companies. And what I think I did have a bit of an epiphany working for a Fortune 100 company. I can remember that our CEO was coming to town. You'd build the books, right? The books for that CEO visit. And at one point, I think we had changed one paragraph a dozen times in anticipation of this CEO's visit. And my poor director looked at me and she said, Robin, we're not saving babies here. It's just a paragraph. And I was like, you know what? We're really not saving babies. This is just retail stuff. And I can do better than this. And I think at that moment, I just said, I'm not going to live in the minutia of corporate America. So I kind of took what was my small business entrepreneurial instincts and big business practices and said, I'll just build my own big business. So I'd say that was maybe my epiphany.
I love it. I love it. Vanessa, how about you? Was there someone in your life that was influential, or a book or an epiphany you may have had?
I don't know if there's any singular thing. I think it was a lot of things. I think growing up, I always had a sense of confidence and a sense that I had something to say. I was once told by one of those authoritarian gentleman bosses, sorry, not by him, by one of his minions, Mr. So-and-so doesn't like young people who think they know the way the world works. That was in response to something that I had said as a young person in my early 20s at a boardroom table, because I was confident enough to do so. So my attitude was, okay, you know what, not accepting that. So I think that was part of it, is just success begets success. And I think as you practice confidence, you gain confidence. So I know it's such a cliche and some people hate this fake it till you make it phrase, but I really do believe in that. I think sometimes you do have to fake that confidence until you find it. So I think that was part of it. I think one of the challenges I had when I left the nonprofit sector, and just to clarify, although I had started as a volunteer with the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario, I did end up joining their staff. So I was actually on their staff for 11 years, building the fundraising business within this larger nonprofit government-funded organization. And I decided that I needed to leave there to go back to the world of business where I had started, and I had done my MBA. And I always said I didn't do my MBA to go work for a charitable organization. That was not my intention. So I wanted to go back into the world of business, but I hadn't developed a functional skill set. I wasn't a marketing professional. I wasn't an HR professional or a finance professional. I didn't even consider myself a fundraising professional, because I had done I don't know what I'm doing, so let me surround myself with mentors and hire people on the team who have the training and skill set. So when I left there, I was really at a loss. I knew I wanted to go into business, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And a senior individual in the business community in Toronto said to me, "You're a business builder." And that was an epiphany for me in a way, because I realized that it was okay that I didn't have a particular functional skill set. I had a generalist skill set. And I do believe that served me well in my role here.
Absolutely.
Wow. So Kim, one of the things we talked about, you and I and Tracy talked about, was some of the attributes of a good leader. And Vanessa brings up another one here, which is confidence, right? Um, so when you think of a good leader, what attributes do you think most have or should have?
Ooh, I think that's a long list.
It is a
Um,
long list. I agree.
you know,
What
I
are the top two
I
or
think I'm
three?
gonna yeah, I think I'm gonna lean more towards soft skills, honestly, just because I feel like again, you can get training on doing so many of the other things. Empathy, I'd say, to a certain extent.
Mhm,
Self-awareness, I have to throw that one in there. I
mhm,
think it's a big factor, and I see it with the people on my team who are most successful. Um, they're confident, but yet they understand they may have limitations, or when we're fitting the pieces of the puzzle together as a franchisor, you have to be self-aware enough to say, I can't fill every role, which, I know Vanessa's talked about, everybody's talked about that, Robin's talked about that, right? But you have to be self-aware to do that, because if you're overly confident, you think you need no one, and I don't think that works. So I'm going to say empathy, self-awareness. I
mhm.
think a resiliency. Um, Absolutely. This is not for the faint of heart. At least I don't think it is. I don't know what other people's experience is. But because I am empathetic, I carry a lot of the weight of what's going on, right? Good and bad. But I'm kind of glad about that, because I think it makes me more cautious, but yet definitive, knowing that I have to do what's right for the overall franchise system. To me, it's a big responsibility.
I
That was
think
so well put.
it really is. I think as leaders, we are a target, we're up front. If we're not under the radar, so any decision we make or any way that we interact is noticed. So these attributes of compassion and empathy and being a bit more cautious allows us to make better decisions, select the right people, etc., and take into consideration our true client, which of course is the franchisee, and our internal clients, our employees. So, Robin, I want to toss this to you, and Tracy, I want you to kick in here too, because I know you have some good thoughts on this. How is it different being a woman leader versus a man leading? Do you think there's positives, negatives? How does it play out? What are your thoughts?
So I'm in an industry that's really male dominated. Business brokerage, 97% of the business brokers in America are men between 55 and 58 years old. So it's not a place where women have traditionally been very successful. And then you couple that with starting to lead a brand that did something very different and specialized in one vertical. There were a lot of people looking at us and saying, what they're doing doesn't make any sense, and they're certainly going to fail. And 21 years later, here we are. And so nana nana boo boo, we're done with you. But I think that I think in some ways, what Kim just alluded to, this empathy that women have, in some ways, that absolutely does make us a better leader. And in other ways, I think it puts upon us a burden to really carry more, and be more personally engaged. Like, I feel the pain of every single one of my franchisees who hasn't met their goal yet this quarter. I'm calling them and I'm interacting with them and I'm sharing with them. And actually, that makes me a better leader, because they know I'm approachable and they can come to me and call me on my cell phone and get me at any hour. They know I'm invested in their success. So I think that empathy really does help to make women stronger leaders. On the other hand, it can also cause us to carry a bigger piece of the burden for the organization.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know you work with a lot of women leaders in your private practice.
True. What I notice is kind of going back to the confidence that I think Vanessa brought up earlier. I see a lot of men who are so eager and willing to have the answer, share the answer, put their hat in the ring for something, and then they might only be 70% equipped or really have 70% of the answer. Whereas a woman who might have 100% of the answer all of a sudden is more reserved and holding back and not quite sure. So then it goes to what Robin said earlier about how she coaches and mentors, young emerging women in business. And I think that's so important, right? And then that ties back into what Vanessa experienced when she did offer. And, the men at the table were not used to having a young woman with that amount of confidence. So it kind of, I don't know, it's just, something that needs to be
Address.
constantly reminded, addressed, worked on over time until, and it's great to see the numbers of women growing in franchise.
Yeah, it's exciting. I want to toss this question over to you, Vanessa, because both Kim and Robin deal with primarily men. You were talking a little bit earlier, and I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that in your business it's primarily women. Am I correct?
Yeah. Most of our franchisees are women.
Or women.
Yeah.
So you were talking a little bit earlier about the logic and the scientific and being rational when one needs to be rational. Tell me how that applies, because women in general, we have more moving parts and more emotion and more depth and more up and downs. And so as a leader dealing with other women, does this more practical, pragmatic, rational side of you help that? Is it a detriment? Is it a problem? Or do you know how to balance it all? Just tell me how you do it.
I have so many thoughts going through my head right now in response to everything you've said, and my own personal conflict around what it means to be a woman in business, because I've never ever felt that lack of confidence or questioning in my own ability. I know, I agree that everything everyone said so far to be true, but I also struggle because I feel like men have come a long way too. I think if we go from what you alluded to earlier, Robin, that traditional authoritative masculine top-down style of leadership, I think men today have learned to be much more empathetic and to get their egos out of the way. But I also know that having spent all that time early in my career, first in the world of marketing, which was female dominated, then in the world of nonprofit and healthcare, which was female dominated. Then before coming to run Blo Blow Dry Bar, having a brief stint on Canada's Wall Street, downtown in our financial district, where I went, wait, what? The world hasn't advanced? I was told you should wear a skirt when you go to that meeting. I was told, don't wear your wedding ring because you'll look too married. And I came away from those experiences absolutely bewildered because I thought the world had advanced in my little microcosms that I'd been living in before. So I really grapple with, I know that there are fundamental differences between men and women and how we function, nature versus nurture, who knows? But I do know that we have to keep moving forward. And I agree in mentoring young women. And I've been so impressed over the years with young women in their 20s on my team who come to me and say, I believe I need to be paid more because we've learned that historically, traditionally, women don't advocate for themselves. So I've really been so impressed. And the future looks bright when I see these young women doing what we know our generations and before didn't do. So having said all that, yes, a franchise system with lots of women in it, there's a lot of emotion. But I was thinking recently, because we had an emotional situation recently where we increased our ad fund fee within the parameters of what was allowed, but it caused a ruckus. And it reminded me of the time I spent on the board of my synagogue, where we were going through a big capital construction project, and people behaved badly and people were not kind to each other. And as emotions were flying over email and our Facebook group recently, it struck me that in a franchise system, like in a community organization, like a synagogue, everybody feels a sense of ownership and they have a lot at stake. And therefore, it's like, we can all admit that we don't behave our best with our family members. That sort of dynamic where you feel like this is mine, this is my thing, and I don't have control over decisions that are being made. I think it brings up a lot of emotion. So I hate to think that there's a lot of emotion because we're a group of a lot of women, although I suspect that might be true. But I think it's also the nature of a franchise system where people feel like they've got stuff at stake. And while they're used to being in control over what happens in their own units, when they don't have control over what's happening in the broader system, it can cause a lot of emotion.
I'm going to echo that. As a past therapist, gone business, the number one issue is just that choice, no choice. When I feel I'm at no choice, we all respond in different ways, including I've been abandoned, I've been betrayed, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm not hurt. Well, but within each of us, it's that free will, right? It's choice, no choice. And in this case, it felt like there was no choice. Corporate is making a decision that's within their right to do so. That's for the benefit for all of us. But I, as a franchisee, didn't get the vote on it, didn't get a say about it. And now I'm feeling something. Some people may feel little and others will feel much more up. So to that point, if you can tell us a story or at least give us an analogy of something, when you were making these kinds of tough decisions as a leader, as all leaders have to do, how do you go about doing that? What is your approach to those decisions? Does competition, size of organization, do any of those things influence your decisions? And then the third part of that question is, the way you make these tough decisions today as a leader, is it different than maybe what you did 10 or 15 years ago? And Kim, I think I'm going to go to you first on that question. When you're making tough decisions, what is your approach to knowing this is the right decision? And is there any outside factors that are influencing it? And is it different today than maybe it was in the past?
Well, if it's okay, I'll answer the last question first.
Is it
different? Absolutely, it's different because I was in a 100% different role, right? Being more in financial roles, CFO, director of finance roles. So definitely different, but always there's that level of I'm more of an introspective person. So I'm going to think it through. And if time is a factor, which many times it is when you're in these roles, I'll stay awake all night if I have to. I'm thinking about it when I'm driving. I'm thinking about it, when I'm doing whatever. Putting the right amount of thought into it and thinking about how it's going to affect, my stakeholders, primarily being my franchise owners. But then I go to the next step, which is I'm going to ask my leadership group or even pivotal people within the organization and maybe some of the franchisees themselves. And I'm a big believer in getting a multitude of counsel from individuals. That doesn't mean you have to use all of it, but it means sometimes you do come up with a good collaborative result. And there are very few decisions that I would make in a vacuum. I just wouldn't feel comfortable with that. When we're in these kind of organizations where however many people we have working for us, I have about 60 people on my team here, and then I have 132 franchises. That's 200 people that it's going to affect, and then all their employees. So, it's not, I don't believe, a good setup to just have one person say, I got it figured out. I'm not, that's not my way to go. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that because not to go on, but I think when it's all said and done, I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror, even if it does not go well. So, like to Vanessa's point, she had every right to do it. By the way, Vanessa, everybody's emotional as a franchisee. It's not just the women. Just so you know, because I'm going to call it, I'll call it passion instead, because I do think it has a level of passion to it. But if it goes badly or if it's not well received, I need to be able to look myself in the mirror and know I did everything to make it as palatable as possible and to make the right decision.
Yeah. Thank you. That was really helpful. I'm so glad this is recorded because I'm going to go back to that. Robin, how do you make decisions, knowing that timing is important, that the decisions as a leader are going to impact all of your franchisees and ultimately their customers? How do you go about that?
So I've been fortunate in my career that my instincts have served me well. And I think what's changed for me over time is that greater sense of responsibility that I am going to impact so many more people. So when I'm first guided to make a decision and I'm instinctively looking in a direction, I go looking for facts. I go looking for data that support it, because ultimately, if that's a decision that I need buy-in, I'm going to get opinions. I'm going to ask people to participate and share, but I also need to make sure that I have data that supports that decision making that I can then share with others to say, I'm guided by instinct to say, this is the right step for us, but here's why. Here's the quantitative analysis that tells us that if we make this investment, then we should get this much in return. So and of course, draw on others once I'm at that point that I know this is what I want to do. Fortunately for me, I run a brand with my husband. So there are many, many meetings around the breakfast table. We talk about our franchise. You talk about passion. When you have a brand that you're, all in your entire family, I'm constantly thinking of new ideas. So I have to bounce those off of other people and put the data to them. And then they scrub out in the wash, then take them to the team and say, this is where I want to go. What do you think? And get them to participate in the decision making.
Great approach. Vanessa, what are your thoughts on the decision-making process that leaders have to go through, which are sometimes difficult, sometimes have to be done pretty quickly? What's your process for doing that?
I would say very similar to what we've just heard. So collaboration, getting other ideas, getting perspectives, finding those people to be the sounding boards or contributors to the decision, looking to data, looking to the facts. And then I would also add that it goes back to your strategic plan. And if you've got a solid strategic plan, and it doesn't have to be a formal document, it can be a outline on a piece of paper, but that's your guidepost. And so when things do get emotional, and I admit to reacting to the emotion of a few weeks ago with, oh gosh, we've upset people, and now what are we going to do, and how are we going to make them feel better, to going, okay, take a breath, clear those clouds of emotion, and let's distill it down. What have we done here? We've followed our strategy. We followed our plan. We did what was best for the system. And now I can, as you say, Kim, I can look myself in the mirror and know that we went through a thoughtful, well-reasoned process guided by a strategic plan that makes sense and is going to get us where we all need to go. And now I can have that confidence to say we did the right thing.
Perfect. I love it. Ladies, this conversation could go on forever, but I want to make sure that we get you out to your real lives. And before we do, Robin, Kim, Vanessa, please let people know how to contact you. Robin, let's start with you. If somebody wanted to learn more about you and We Sell Restaurants, how would they get hold of you?
Go straight to WeSellRestaurants.com, WESELL restaurants with an S.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm out there and happy. DM me if you want to have a private conversation or just jump on. I'm out there every single week talking about topics for the women in franchising. committee and Women in Franchising on Clubhouse.
Perfect. And Miss Kim?
Definitely LinkedIn. I'm a big user of that. So I'd love for everybody on here to connect with me if I'm not connected with you. And then also at our website, www.PIRTEKUSA.com.
Thank you. And Vanessa?
I'm on LinkedIn as well, Vanessa Yakobson, and our website is blowmedry.com. That's BLOMEDRY.com. And I look forward to connecting.
Perfect. Tracy, I'm going to ask you to do the wrap up. Before I do, I really love this conversation about decision making. Having been in the franchise space and worked with hundreds of franchisors, I have found decision making one of the biggest errors folks make, including myself, is waiting too long to make the decision. And whether that's fear or not enough data or feeling like we don't have enough data, but I see many mistakes is delaying that decision, which then can cause a ripple effect, from the technology perspective, competition, etc. Tracy, these ladies have been incredible, huh?
They are rock stars.
Rock stars. What was your biggest takeaway? How would you like to wrap this up?
I think it's so important that we actually understand the different types of leadership styles that there are. And I'm going to point to one of the earliest people who I assessed, right, with the profile, the Zorko profile. And he was actually in franchise. He was a franchisee. And this story is just so classic because he looked at his report. And before I even had a chance to open my mouth, he said, Tracy, I'm so disappointed. I'm like, well, why is that? He said, because I didn't come up as more of a leader. And I said to him, well, didn't you tell me that your brother came to you and said, in order for us to really become businessmen in this field, that we were going to have to X, Y, Z? He said, yeah. And I said, and weren't you the one who pulled that whole team together to make that happen? And he said, yes. So going back to Vanessa's point earlier, he was a generalist. He led with his generalist skills and he made things happen that way. He led with his executive functions. He led with these incredible leadership skills of team building. So at the end of the day, conversations like this need to happen so that we can all continue to realize the type of leadership styles that there are out there, and so that we can each go out, create teams, and build communities and build successful franchises.
Love it. Having studied franchisee and franchisor performance now for 30 plus years, I can tell you one of the most common things that leaders do have is they are generalists. So they don't always score super high in the leadership area, but they could step in any role and take over, which makes them good leaders because they know how to build a team around them. And each of you have proven that again and again. So thank you, ladies, for, oh my gosh, for your wisdom and for your time. We love you. We appreciate you and the time that you've given us. So thanks a whole bunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the rest of you listening in to the Franchise Woman podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forge, we'll see you next week on another episode.